Taxing times. It's a pun. Okay, so I'll address a few of the issues with regards to international and local tax. There are quite a few things that happen in international tax, and it's a bit of a mess, and that will affect you. It's quite complex, obviously, so I'll try and make it as simple as possible. But on the local side, I'll just touch on a few points that can reduce taxable income and vehicles and schemes that you can use to pay less tax, which I think everyone would appreciate. Starting with the international side, international allowances that the South African Reserve Bank gives everybody. So if you're 18 or older, the SARB gives you an amount of 1 million rand as a discretionary allowance. That's for all offshore company spending. So if you buy from Amazon, from eBay, online websites, your Spotify, things like that, and all of your overseas trips, payments to foreign individuals, that needs to come out of your 1 million rand discretionary allowance. There is a further 10 million rand per person per year that the South African Reserve Bank cannot deny you. So every person is allowed that further 10 million. They do require, though, a tax clearance certificate. So if you have your tax clearance certificate in order and your tax affairs in order, you can take out effectively 10 plus 1, 11 million rand per annum. I don't have that lying around, but if I did, I'll show you why you would want to take that offshore in a moment. So using the purchase power parity formula, and it's just a means of determining exchange rates and forecasting them. So up to here, backwards, is actual rates, and this is what I've used to determine my forecasted rate. It looks like this graph goes back about 40 years, about 4.5 decades. So, when we started in the 1970s, it was $2 per rand, roughly. And we've now hit that death spiral, and we're at about, today's rate is 14.80. So a constant and methodical decrease in the value of our purchasing power. If we take it back just 10 years to 2008-9, the rate was 7 Rand 660 per dollar. 7 Rand 60 is half of what today is. And if you just bought hard currency, parked it in hard currency, taken absolutely no risk, and that's just on the dollar. The pound and the euro have been significantly more aggressive in their, in the rand's degradation. You would have made, 100% return. So it's an interesting extrapolation, because if we go just 3 years ahead, it looks almost exponential. In the year 2022, it's actually almost 2 years ahead. My predicted range is per dollar is anywhere between, on the favorable side, 16 Rand per dollar, and on the unfavorable side, and this is if there are no further blunders by the South African government, we all know don't love to blunder, 22 Rand per dollar. So take as advantage of as much of the offshore allowance as possible, is my recommendation. As with everything, doing anything offshore has its own criteria and nuances. International investing, its own taxes, right? So local dividends that you earn, you include them in your taxable income, but they are completely exempt. Foreign dividends that a local resident earns are not exempt. They have a partial exemption, and you will pay about 20% on your foreign dividends earned. So it's less of an incentive to invest offshore, but you're making that back probably on the exchange rate fluctuations. The gains from disposal of an investment that's your capital gains rate, and so 18% is the same with local and with international. Nothing else to note there really. Okay, the famous. You're gonna love it, Donald Trump. Okay, my dad liked that one. One of his major talking points, obviously, is the economy. It's doing so well. You're going to get tired of winning. And the reason for that is actually doing very well. The reason for that is the act that he introduced in 2017. It's called the Jobs and Tax Cut Act. And it's been quite prolific in uplifting, well, as a stimulus package, in uplifting the US economy, which, to be fair, didn't actually need much uplifting, but it has helped his re-election prospects. Okay, so his tax cut on corporate America went from 35% to 21%. Biggest tax cut percentage in US history on corporate America, which is huge. If you think about it, I wouldn't mind that. It has brought about with it a promised boom, and it's put a lot of money back in the hands of corporate America, who you would assume are the most intellectual and savvy people to handle that surplus cash. So the S&P 500 this year has rallied 23%. Nasdaq's 26%. You know, it's really flying. If you don't hold any capital in the US, you're still going to benefit because the jobs, the unemployment figures have gone from 9.5% 5 years ago to around 3.4% a few weeks ago. So it's an unbelievable turnaround. A strange thing has happened. You know, even though there's been a decrease in corporate tax rates, there's been an increase in tax collected, because of a strange phenomenon called the Laffer curve in economics. And you can tell I've just finished my degree. Okay, so as you can see, the only thing that's really decreased there is corporate income taxes earned. But look at this, on everything else, so 2016 is the base. On everything else, taxes collected is increased as a result of the better performance in the economy, even though taxes were decreased as a percentage. So I'll explain this to you quickly because it's quite unusual. Theoretically, it's possible, and this graph will explain it, because of this. Right? So pre-Trump, there was a 35% tax rate on corporate America, and this is the GDP that corresponds with it. It's called the Laffer curve here. Okay. When he cut it, there was a significant increase in the GDP, which obviously creates, so the area under the graph is essentially the tax collected. And as you can see, it's a greater proportion of the graph. So when compared, it does actually make sense. Because GDP increases, as with GDP increasing, the rate might decrease, sorry about that. The rate might decrease, but taxes collected has increased significantly. Okay. And obviously with more people working as a result of the tax, of the corporate America hiring more people, there are more people paying personal income tax. So interesting, something maybe only I found interesting. Here we go. Impending changes to foreign employment tax. Everybody knows somebody, a local resident working overseas, I'm sure. So the law has been passed, and what this means is that if you're a South African tax resident working in any country out of South Africa and you're earning more than R1 million, you are exposed to possible double taxation, obviously taking into account the double tax agreements, which can deny certain taxing rights to some countries. But you could be exposed to tax both locally and in the foreign country. Something to really be concerned about. Although what will usually happen is the country with the greater tax rate is the maximum of the tax. So they will share the tax between the two countries. Just something to note, because it's going to have a big effect on planning when you leave, when those that leave do leave. Okay. So CRS, the international tax system, now that I've finished studying it, appears to be completely broken. Okay, there is a mismatch between where the profits are made and where the profits are taxed. One of the biggest economies for actual declarations of income is the Cayman Islands, and it has almost no corporate at all. So it's interesting how companies will make their profit in, say, the UK or South Africa and shift it to these corporate tax companies with a corporate tax rate of 0. So it's an attractive scheme where they just shift their tax base. And Ireland is an example of a first world country that's doing it, which has helped Apple reduce their tax rate from what was before 35% average effective tax rate to a now 9%. So they pay maximum 9%, and they get rebates from Ireland, from the government of Ireland, for having moved there. A nice little scheme, if you ask me. Okay, so she's thinking how this will affect you, and there's the slide. Okay, so the BEPS project and CRS, what this is basically is all of the countries have come together, and the international tax community has come together, and they've pretty much at the UN and at the OECD, it's where they all meet up and chat. They don't like these schemes, especially the first world. And if you recognize any of these countries, or if you have assets that you think nobody knows about in any of these countries, beware. Because CRS is a part of that project where they all came together and discussed how they're going to resolve this issue. And basically all of these countries, there's about 100 of them, and I'll quickly go back to this side because here's more of the first world. I'm sure you recognize a few of these, for even the tax havens are on there, although to a lesser degree. But if you do have assets in those places and you think maybe there's a possibility that nobody knows about them, there is no such thing as international financial confidentiality anymore. Okay, and on the local side, so there's obviously an increasing profile of taxes, as I'm sure we've all felt. So the mini budget last week was a disaster, hair-pulling exercise, bit of a joke actually. The tax collection is down, well, it's not actually down, but it's less than expected. Spending is up, and Tito Mboweni was left with egg on his face and scratching his head, doesn't really know what to do, and no meaningful solutions have come out of this. So where do they turn, and where can they turn? To the taxpayer. And they will be, I'm sure, increasing taxes on South African tax residents. That's you and me. So the tax to GDP ratio in South Africa is 25.9. Well, it will be 25.9. It's currently 25.4. Huge. If you think about that, that is a quarter of the economy is just completely extracted and taken into less than capable hands. The world average here is 14%. So essentially we're running semi-socialism because we're the 10th highest taxed country in the world. South Africa has a GDP ratio I've just discussed, and the profile is mushrooming. We can expect increase in tax going forward, and it will affect all of us. So the medium and the long term, especially, I think the short term, they're going to try other means by issuing more bonds and things, but eventually the debt situation is going to mean that they have to go to the taxpayer just to settle the interest, which is where we're heading. So the recommendation here is, with the general trend of taxes increasing, take your opportunity to pay taxes as soon as possible. I mean that on capital gains, if the opportunity presents itself, take that opportunity. It's most likely going to go up. Capital is a swear word to the ANC government, so they will be taxing that more aggressively. Be sure of that. Income, I think, will probably remain where it is. And an interesting fact is that 90% of South Africa's income tax is paid by 2,000 taxpayers. 2,000. Okay. An African proverb I love. Okay. Look where you slipped, and not where you fell. Sorry, Alexis, your phone more entertaining. Okay. Alexis slipped a little while ago and hit his head. Just jokes. So this is where we are. We're where we fell. And this is where we slipped. So it's something to just be, mindful of. It doesn't appear like he's doing that much, but, don't blame him for everything. Okay, these are the structures, mostly just generic. There are a few more complex structures, but we can address those in private if anybody's interested. Tax-free savings account, a must. Everybody in this room should, well, not everybody, but almost everybody, I reckon, should, if you've got an income, take advantage of the tax-free savings account. You are allowed up 500,000 Rand lifetime contribution maximum. Essentially what this is 4 or 5 years ago, SARS used to, on an annual basis, increase an amount of 23,000 that they used to give you as in free interest you can earn every year. So they won't tax the first 22,800 that you earn. That's yours to keep, no tax. Now they decided they're going to stop increasing that allowance, and they're rather going to do this. So you can every year contribute 33,000 Rand per person over the age of 18 into a tax-free savings account, and all of the growth that happens on that is tax-free. Okay? My calculations say that by the time you're finished, after 15 years, because that's what it'll take, at 2,750 Rand a month, you will reach your 500,000 Rand lifetime amount. Your contributions will have been 450,000, and your pot will be tax-free 3 million. So something to really consider. Okay, endowment structures. More focused these. But for those of you with a tax rate above 30%, this is for you. It effectively wraps your investments in an endowment. It's just a structure and caps the tax at 30%, as opposed to your tax rate, your whatever increasing tax rate. Caps it at 30%, and that's only on the income earned. So if it's a capital gain, it's taxed at 12%, as opposed to your most likely 18%. So one more thing to note about these endowment structures is that you are locked in for a period of 5 years. You can get it out a bit earlier, but just generally, and they're protected from your creditors. Nobody thinks they're going to go insolvent, but it can happen. Okay, so Section 12J, venture capital. So basically the minimum investment is 100,000 Rand, and the maximum is 2.5 million per taxpayer per annum. Basically what this is an incentive to drive jobs in South Africa. So all of this investment goes to venture capital companies. It is high risk, but SARS does give you a nice tax incentive. So if you invest 100,000 Rand, you can reduce your taxable income by 100,000 Rand. So essentially, you're only putting in, for 100,000, you're putting in 55,000, and SARS, that's assuming you're on the highest tax bracket, SARS will put in the other 45,000 by reducing your tax rate. Excuse me?
If they've got the money.
If they've got the money, yeah. And they don't. Okay, and one other thing to note about these structures is there's a 5-year minimum investment span. Okay, there's a voluntary disclosure. I see quite a few people on my day-to-day, and I know a lot of people who don't tell SARS everything. If that does sit on your mind and you do struggle with that, there's a voluntary disclosure coming up. So essentially, this is where SARS, look, the cheapest way for them to get more money is to basically just invite you to come and tell them about the tax that you haven't paid. And in doing so, what they do is they bring you onto the book. So if you haven't paid on that offshore investment or that property that you should have told them about, they bring that now onto the book and they know about it. So rather than hiring more investigators, this is their means of getting you onto the book. Okay, so this voluntary disclosure period, it's running from Jan to March 2020. They do happen periodically and sporadically, but the benefits of them are amnesty from criminal prosecution and no previous penalties that you would have faced or interest on that back tax that you should have paid is charged. So it's just on the tax that you missed. Okay, and in preparing for today and in my everyday, day-to-day attempt to be informed, I've run headfirst into a paradox. And in my attempt to consume the news, if I don't, as you can read, you're not informed, and if you do, you're most likely misinformed. Every source has a bias, and that's the nature of today's media. So in dealing with this, I consulted the timeless teaching of Socrates. Okay, so in this day and age, dis and misinformation is rife. And here is some advice on how to handle it. In ancient Greece, 469 BC, Socrates was widely lauded for his wisdom. One day, the great philosopher came upon an acquaintance who ran up to him and excitedly said, "Socrates, do you know what I just heard about one of your students?" "Wait a moment," Socrates replied. "Before you tell me, I'd like you to pass a little test. It's called the triple filter." "Triple filter? That's right. Before you talk to me about my student, let's take a moment to filter what you're going to say. The first filter is truth. Have you made absolutely sure that what you're about to tell me is true?" "No," the man said. "Actually, I just heard it, and..." "All right," Socrates said, "so you don't really know if it's true. Now let's try the second filter, that of goodness. Is what you're about to tell me about my student something good?" "No, on the contrary." "So," Socrates said, "you want to tell me something about my student even though you're not certain it's true?" The man shrugged, a little embarrassed, and Socrates said, "You may still pass the third test, though. That is the third filter of usefulness. Is what you want to tell me about my student going to be useful?" "No, not really," the man said. "Well," concluded Socrates, "if what you want to tell me is neither true, nor good, nor useful, why tell it to me at all?" The man was a little ashamed and defeated, and for this reason, Socrates was such a great philosopher and held in such high esteem. And it also explains why he never found out that his student was sleeping with his wife. Thank you.